नमस्कार आणि जय श्रीराम. आपल्या सर्वांचं बृहन महाराष्ट्र मंडळ तत्वज्ञान या उपक्रमात खूप खूप स्वागत आहे. आज आपण एक नवीन सिरीज सुरू करणार आहोत आणि ती सिरीज आपल्यासाठी घेऊन आलेले आहेत डॉक्टर विनोद देशमुख. आपल्या नेहमीच्या शिरस्त्याप्रमाणे आपण पहिले आपल्या सत्राची सुरुवात ही गलद्दान गंडम मिलभृंग खंडम चलच्चारुषुण्डं जगत्राणशौण्डं लसद्दन्तकाण्डं विपभ्रङ्गचण्डं शिवप्रेमपिण्डं भजे वक्रतुण्डम् अहं निर्विकल्पो निराकाररूपो विभुर्व्याप्य सर्वत्र सर्वेन्द्रियाणां सदा मे समत्वं न मुक्तिर्न बन्धः चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरुर्साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि. श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय. ही ओळख त्यांनीच मला पाठवलेली आहे. Dr. Vinod Deshmukh is MD, PhD, THC and is retired neurologist from Jacksonville, Florida. He was an associate professor of neurology at the University of Florida from 1984 to 1996. He had his own private practice of neurology in St. Augustine, Florida from 1996 to 2007. He has published over 70 scientific articles, including monograms on first is Astonishing Brain and Holistic Consciousness, Neuroscience and Vedanta Perspective, Brain-Blood Flow, Multi-Stream Self, Turiya, Vedic Psychology, Science of Wisdom, Consciousness, Awareness, Presence, Nirvana, असे अनेक. Poetry, photography, and painting are his hobbies. He has published 7 books of his original poems, essays, and photos. He lives a simple, creative, and content life of mindful presence, inner peace, and love for the sacred nature. आपल्याला विनोद काका फारसे नवीन नाहीत. आपल्या बृहन महाराष्ट्र मंडळ तत्वज्ञानच्या व्हॉट्सअप ग्रुपवर काका त्यांचे अनेक घेतलेले फोटो पाठवत असतात. बहुतेक सगळे फोटो फक्त निसर्गाचे असतात आणि त्याच्यातून त्यांना काय जाणवत आहे हे पण ते छानपैकी आपल्याला नेहमी एक्सप्लेन करत असतात. तर आपण आता जास्त वेळ न घालवता विनोद काकांनाच विनंती करू की तुम्ही तुमच्या या सत्राला सुरुवात करा.
थँक्यू व्हेरी मच. ऐकू येत आहे ना?
हो, ऐकू येत आहे. आणि काका कुठली स्लाइड हवी असेल, मूव्ह करायची असेल तर तसं सांगाल, म्हणजे मृणाल ते तुम्हाला सहकार्य देईल.
Oh, I see.
हा.
So I cannot move the slides from here.
नाही, तुम्ही जे सांगा स्क्रोल करा खाली वरती जा असं, मग मृणाल करेल ते.
Okay. So I can say next slide or something like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to really thank Vrushali for organizing all this. I'm very grateful to her for inviting me and this series of 4 talks about neuroscience, brain, mind, self, and also the link between science and spirituality. This has been my passion from childhood. And I've been interested in Vedanta and neuroscience from the very beginning. My father was a great scholar of Vedic studies, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita. Somebody, so I did have encouragement from the beginning there. But I was also interested in the neuroscience perspective. And with my experience in neuroscience, I'm trying to integrate the amazing Vedic and Upanishadic observations, which are subjective, try to understand them in terms of neuroscience and the modern psychology, neuropsychology. So, my book about the astonishing brain and holistic consciousness, Vedanta and neuroscience perspectives, was published in 2012 by Neuroscience Publishers, New York. But I've been writing poetry and essays and love for nature and photography since almost 1980. So I love nature, and I'm very fortunate to show you a copy of my latest book. It's called Nature's Delight. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. Do you see it? It is called Nature's Delight, and it has several photographs arranged by January, February, March, April, May, June till December. And it gives an idea about the seasonality in this area, Northeast Florida. I go for a walk twice a day, morning and evening, and go with a very open mind, without any agenda, without any specific aim, but just watching, noticing nature and the birds and manatees and the flowers. And I try to share them with my neighbors, and a lot of them really enjoy it. They love it. After all, nature is the great healer. And neuroscience has shown clearly that walking in nature minimizes your stress and gives you more health, happiness, and joy, creativity. So it's very important to be in touch with nature and, in fact, commune with nature. So, and when I walk in nature, I get inspired, I get a lot of new ideas. Like this morning, I saw a woodpecker in a dead tree on our street, and I was wondering why didn't they cut the tree. But when I noticed the little baby woodpecker, I was so happy to see that, and I took photos of it and showed to all my neighbors, and they were so pleased to see that. So nature works in many interesting ways, and we should be in tune with nature, appreciate the great wonder of nature. And life is full of wonders, full of surprises, but of course also sometimes obstacles, difficulties, stress, sometimes tragedies. So we have to deal with all that with a sort of quiet, peaceful, but attentive and present mind. My whole emphasis is to develop the art of presence, what I call pristine presence, because this presence is ever fresh, ever new. And we need to come to that ocean of pristine presence. And in that ocean, we have these quantum streams of experience, kind of sequences of experience. And these sequences are seen with your breathing, your walking, your movement, your speech, all that are really sort of dualistic sequence of movements. Let me go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So, in this slide, I want to show you the analogy of a flame and the smoke. And the flame is a very dynamic process. And our source of our being, conscious being, or pure awareness or presence, is like a flame which is very dynamic. And then there is smoke, and the smoke is kind of slow mental activity based on memory, and that causes duality, and that causes our suffering. Because there is a big difference between memory based slow thinking and slow mental processing and the presence or the present mind as it is from moment to moment with a complete freshness are two different modes. In fact, in 1980-82, I presented a poster to the Society of Neuroscience calling it that there are two modes of awareness or consciousness. One is the mnemonic mode based on memory and duality, and the other is the presence mode, which is non-dual, which is or non-local, which is phenomenal. So we need to learn to differentiate between these two. Next, please. Next slide. I want to show you some interesting uh, progress that has been made in neuroscience. Neuroscience doesn't have all the answers, especially when you ask about the subjective experience or what is called the hard problem of consciousness. That is still a big puzzle. And that's why many neuroscientists are trying to learn from Vedic studies, Vedanta, Upanishads, Buddhism. A lot of it is from Buddhism they are learning. And they're trying to create their own terminology to explain all these different states. But neuroscience has figured out, especially in auditory system, all the way from the ear, peripheral ear, all the way to the brainstem and to the cortex. And these electrical signatures are very specific. For instance, the very early waveforms, like the first 10 milliseconds, which are called auditory evoked potentials, you can diagnose very early lesions in brainstem, as we used to do for multiple sclerosis or brainstem strokes. And then there is the middle range. And finally, P300. P300 is the waveform in the cortex when you become conscious of a stimulus. One of the typical experiment we used to do in the EEG department is you hear different sounds uh, like a tick, 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 and then a different sound like toe or something. And then we ask the patient or the volunteer to count how many odd sounds did you hear during a given period of time. And to detect that odd sound, it takes about 300 milliseconds. 300 milliseconds is 1 millisecond is like 1,000th of a second. So 300 millisecond is a very sensitive measure of your attentiveness and conscious processing. Next, please. What is interesting that our auditory cortex is arranged tonotopically. Tonotopically means according to the frequency. It's almost like a piano scale. Usually the auditory frequency is about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or cycles per second. So you can see this strip of primary auditory cortex, which shows all the different frequencies. So there is a frequency modulated processing in the auditory cortex. There is also a frequency modulated processing in the visual cortex. We call it frequency following response. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. A lot of the human history and human culture is based on symbols. And you can recognize some of these symbols, like Om, or a cross, or the crescent moon. And all these symbols meant a lot for humanity. In fact, they become the representation of a particular religion or a society or a group. And these symbols don't necessarily resemble the actual reality they are representing. For example, there is nothing like a sun in the top left, or there's nothing like a lion in the word lion. It's just a word. Same thing with numbers, words, and even images. They are impressions, they are symbols. But for humanity, symbols have become extremely important. But what has happened, sometimes we forget the reality as it is without the symbols. Can we look at things without naming it, without talking about it? Can we look at a flower? Can we look at a sunset without commenting on it, without labeling it? It is strange that we have named even the days of the week, or the months and the years. So strange. And of course, we have named all the countries, and so naming has become a kind of passionate activity of human beings. Sometimes it is good, but sometimes it comes in the way of direct perception, direct observation, non-verbal observation. In fact, I'll go to that the left hemisphere is mainly verbal and calculating, with numbers, while the right hemisphere is more about attention, listening, music, understanding. So it's an interesting difference between right and left hemisphere, which I will come to that. Next. In Vedic literature, Om has a lot of significance. And the Mandukya Upanishad is in fact devoted to the study of Om, its meaning. And it's amazing how much insight they had. Like they divided the Om into A, U, and Ma. A representing the wakeful state, U representing the dream state, Ma representing the deep sleep state. And the fourth state is called Turiya, the fourth. And the Turiya state is like the awareness itself. It is the Sarvasakshi, Sakshibha, which is aware of the other three states. Avasthatraya Sakshi. So, in our Upanishad group, we did study Mandukya Upanishad. It's a fascinating observation of wakefulness, sleep, and dream as variations of that pure awareness, of pure consciousness, which is Turiya. Next. Now, all of these states have a characteristic quality and also electrochemistry. For instance, this during wakefulness, the glucose metabolism is very high. During dream state also, there is a lot of activity going on, the glucose consumption, oxygen consumption. But in deep sleep, everything becomes sort of quiet. So there is a low metabolic activity, and you can differentiate these by studying the uh, metabolic patterns by PET scanning. Next. Now, there are certain specific changes that occur in the brain, and we can appreciate that by functional MRI. For instance, during seeing, there is activation of the occipital lobe. During hearing, there is the temporal lobe gets activated. During speaking, the Broca's area gets activated. And during thinking, there is both frontal and parietal lobe activity, and association areas are involved. Next. People have tried to understand the human nervous system in many different ways. And this is one way to look at it, as a sort of evolutionary tree in which the brainstem has been called the reptilian brain. The limbic system has been called the mammalian brain. The cortex, neocortex, has been called the primate brain. And the more prefrontal cortex has been named as the more advanced intelligence with memory. Dolphins have pretty good memory and way of communication with each other. They have a very complex system of communication. This is a sort of simplification how the brain works and how it evolved. Next. There are two main systems for the control of behavior. One is what is called instinctive behavior, or the gut level behavior, or subconscious behavior, which is mainly in the reticulolimbic system, like sexuality, feeding, fear, defense, all that is subconscious. And then there is the voluntary or the cortical system, in which you learn to do things, complex things, like rock climbing, playing an instrument, dancing, performance. It is something that you need to learn, and by practice make it even better and more refined and develop an expertise in it. But both these systems have to work together. It's not that one is not necessary or one is inferior. There is no such thing as that. The brain has to work as a whole, and the human mind has to work together. Next. There are three basic levels of functioning. In the lower subcortical areas or the brainstem, there is the basic functioning like heart function, breathing, swallowing, speaking, either approach or avoid some of the basic reactions, avoid pain, approach pleasure. And then there is the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. Amygdala is a very prominent structure in limbic system. But there is also pleasure areas like in the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, where you have a great sense of pleasure. So we have both pain and pleasure at the same time. So it's a kind of balance between the two. And then finally, at the higher level, there is cortical area in which you do thinking, planning, memory, self-understanding, all that. Next. One of the ways to look at the brain and its control of behavior and mind is to think of it that there are three different networks. It is called the tripartite cortical neural network theory. Now, the middle part is what is called the salience network. Salience network means from each moment to moment, we are constantly evaluating the situation and coming to a quick grasp of, is this safe for me or is it unsafe? Is this person a friend or is he a foe? Is somebody trying to threaten me or is somebody trying to help me or love me? So this continuous balancing act is based on the salience network. And the salience network includes both the reticular activating system, limbic system, as well as anterior cingulate cortex and the insular cortex. Then there are two systems on either side. One on the left side is called the default mode network. Default mode network is active even during rest. It is based on memory because it's connected to hippocampus, especially the autobiographical memory and self-referential memory. That I am so and so, I am such and such, I did this and that. All the autobiography and self-related processing happens in the default mode network. And on the other side is the frontoparietal executive network, so that the salience network in a way decides whether to act or not to act, whether to respond or not to respond. So there is a fine balance between these two that we all deal with. Next. Then in human being, the prefrontal cortex, this front part of the frontal cortex, has evolved quite a lot compared to chimpanzees and other monkeys. So in this front part of the prefrontal cortex, it controls all other systems like the sensation, perception, movement, breathing, arousal, all that, especially to be able to say no, to be able to pause, to stop for a moment, to be able to say, no, I don't want that second chocolate. You see, or no, I don't want that smoke a cigarette or whatever. Or I don't want to take another drink. To be able to say no to yourself, this inhibitory control depends on the prefrontal cortex. When you drink too much or when you have drugs, then this inhibitory cortex is inhibited and you become disinhibited. You do things that are not really appropriate, and that can happen. So we need to develop a good self-control, self-awareness, and management of your own behavior and conduct. Next. The language has specific areas. Like in the front, there is what is called the Broca's area. Broca's area is involved in articulating words, producing sentences, learning appropriate grammar. And at the back is the Wernicke's area, which is involved in comprehension. What does that word mean? And to understand the story behind that word. And of course, if you read a word, it goes from eye to the occipital cortex, then to the Wernicke's area, and then to Broca's area. To listen and say a word, it goes from ear to auditory cortex, and then to Wernicke's area, and then to Broca's area to speak out. So language areas are very important. Of course, language function is dependent on the left hemisphere. Right hemisphere also participates in language, but more in comprehension and attentional control and music and emotional feelings. So I'll come to that later. Next. We have been able to show what happens in the brain during speech production versus speech comprehension. So you can actually map out the areas of the brain that are activated in a living being during speech, during thinking, during listening. So we have made a lot of progress in that. I think functional MRI and the EEG are the two most advanced techniques that we use in neuroscience at present. Next. Electroencephalography or EEG is also a very interesting technique. It's our brainwave study, brainwave activity. And these brainwaves are very specific, like the brainwaves during wakefulness, brainwaves during dream state, during deep sleep state. Of course, we don't have many examples of Turiya, so we don't know what happens in Turiya. But one possibility from the Buddhist monk study is that there is gamma activity with insights in Turiya. There is also a sort of quietness, calmness with the alpha activity. So there is a baseline of theta and alpha activity. And then you get spurts of gamma activity, which is 30 to 100 hertz, where you get inspiration, insights, understanding, aha moment, which is phenomenal. But these EEG patterns are very characteristic. For example, if somebody goes into anesthesia, you can see going from awake to light sleep to deeper sleep to slow wave sleep. One of the anesthesiologists from Mass General Hospital always does brain mapping, and he can tell clearly if somebody has awareness or not based on the EEG pattern. If he's in a delta wave sleep, there's no way he can be aware. But if he's in alpha rhythm or beta activity, then it's possible that he is not really anesthetized. So he needs more anesthesia. So he actually monitors based on the EEG and the brain mapping. Next. Our brain and nervous system depends on various neurotransmitters. It's not only electrical but also electrochemical. And the neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, serotonin, dopa, orexin. Orexin acts like a modulating neurotransmitter. There is a orexin deficiency in sleeping syndrome where people have drop attacks and sudden sleep. There is also an animal model in dogs where you have the sleep condition when there is deficiency of orexin. But fortunately, normally, our brain is very finely tuned between the calming neurotransmitters and activating neurotransmitters. It's always a balance between the two. Next. Now, our consciousness has two aspects. One is just the wakefulness, and the other is awareness. And you can see that if you are in coma or deep anesthesia, your awareness is very low and wakefulness is also very low. But there can be states in which there may be a vegetative state or a or a or a minimal conscious state or lucid dreaming. All these states have been defined and can be calculated based on EEG and also responds to an electrical stimulus, the complexity of the brain response to electrical stimulus. Next. Some of the patients, by the way, who are in coma, and some of them have been found to have awareness. And the way they found out is you ask the patient to imagine that you are playing tennis and you move the racket to hit a ball. And there have been activity in their arm area in some of the patients if they have awareness, which is kind of fascinating. So you need to think about some of these so-called comatose patients can have awareness. So you have to be careful about. And there are more and more new techniques that are coming up to figure out minimal conscious awareness versus vegetative state. Now, the whole thing works like a loop. You have a motor activity or action, and then you have a sensory feedback, and there is an integration in the brain of this loop. So you act, and then you get a feedback, and you correct your action, and you act again. This is how we learn. Like a child learning a new language, you speak first, and then you get a feedback from either yourself or your mom or your family, and then you try to correct that. So that's how you learn a language. So there is this loop of integration, which is fascinating. Next. I have great respect for Wilder Penfield. He was a Canadian neurosurgeon from Montreal, and he did amazing fundamental work on human brain in conscious patients, epilepsy patients, and he mapped both the sensory and the motor areas of the brain, what is called the homunculus, sensory motor maps forming the homunculus. And the map of the human body depends on how much we use a particular organ, particular part of the brain, than just the anatomical representation. Here, for instance, you have a lot more representation of the face than the back or the trunk or the legs. Next. When I was in London doing neurosurgery, I wanted to go and work with Penfield, but unfortunately, he didn't have any opening and I couldn't get into that. So I went into neurophysiology and did PhD medicine from University of Glasgow, which I enjoyed. You have to do what you can with what you have. This is a sensory homunculus. The other one is a motor homunculus. And it depends on the functional use and also the sensitivity of the part of the brain or the body. Next. Now, one of the powerhouse in the brainstem is what is called the reticular activating system. This reticular activating system is like the dynamo in the brainstem that generates neuroelectricity or bioelectricity, and it activates the cerebral cortex. That's how we become awake, aware, and we have a mental function, mental activity. It also activates the cerebellum and the lower body, so we are able to walk, speak, and do all the things. So this brainstem reticular activating system is like the source of neuroelectric activity to the whole nervous system. Now, one of the ways we decide the brain death syndrome, where somebody's kind of died without any further hope, when all the brainstem functions are lost. No pupillary response, no response to pain, no response, no breathing, and EEG becomes flat. So it's a pretty sad situation, but that is the criteria of declaring somebody brain dead. Next. This is the reticular activating system in the brainstem that activates the whole cortex, cerebellum, and also the lower body. So it's a very vital system, and it deals with pain, pleasure, sensing the environment, sensing any threat, things like that. Next. Now, conscious arousal is very important to have it optimal, not too low or not too high. Your both psychophysical performance depends on optimal arousal. You will do your best. If you are bored, apathetic, and drowsy, you will do poorly. If you are over anxious and hyperactive, you will do poorly. So it has to be in the middle of this bell shaped curve, optimal arousal. And mindfulness and presence mindedness kind of aims at this middle part. Next. We have two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Sympathetic sort of activates the whole organism and is for fight and flight, and the parasympathetic more for ingestion and digestion and sleep. But both systems are essential. They are complementary, they work together. So we need both. It's not one or the other. Next. And a good combination of these systems gives us, whether you are agitated or relaxed, whether you are sad or happy, it depends on how much is the level of this two systems working together. Next. We have to think of the neural control of respiration in the sense the main respiratory center is in the lower brainstem, in the medulla, ventral medullary group, ventral group, and then dorsal group, and then there is the pontine center. The ventral respiratory group is the one that generates the breathing pattern, and then dorsal respiratory group adjusts to that, and the pontine center adjusts the rhythm, the frequency, the intensity, all that. And those who do pranayama, they realize how this voluntary control, which is mediated through the pontine center, works. So that's a very interesting part. Next. And this breathing has both automatic control as well as voluntary control. The voluntary control, of course, comes from the cortex, and the automatic control comes from the reticular limbic system based on CO2, pH, O2, all that. Next. Stephen Porges came up with an idea, what he calls the polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory is that he says the vagal nuclei and the lower brainstem senses the environment. He calls it neuroception. And that happens instantly. And you judge whether you are safe or you are not safe. Is there a danger surrounding you? And you respond to that based on whether there is a danger or not, whether you are safe or not. And your body subconsciously responds to that threat or to safety. So it's a kind of interesting theory. There is a book by him also called Polyvagal Theory. Next. The olfactory system is a very, of course, some of you do pranayam, anulom vilom. So it stimulates not only the nasopharynx, but it stimulates the olfactory nerve and also the limbic system directly. The pyriform cortex, the medial temporal lobe, hippocampus, and the olfactory system. So it's a very powerful way of directly stimulating the brain by inhalation, exhalation. It's a unique technique. By breathing, you can control to some extent our mental activity. And yoga has been recommending that, or yoga is based on that, which is very interesting. Next. Now, the olfactory cortex is in the top of the temporal lobe. That's the cortical area. Then the taste is in the anterior part of the parietal lobe. At the lower part of the occipital lobe, there is an area for face recognition. There is an interesting condition called prosopagnosia. Agnosia means inability to process or understand. Prosopagnosia means inability to decipher a face. And unfortunately, some patients with traumatic brain injury, stroke, or Alzheimer's disease have a hard time recognizing the faces of their family, friends, and ultimately even their own face, their own picture, they are unable to recognize, which is very sad. But it depends on this area of the occipital, this visual area at the undersurface of the occipital lobe. Next. Our sense of flavor is a very unique experience, and it involves multiple senses: vision, audition, taste, smell, memory. All these things are involved. When you see a nice a cake or coffee or tea, you have a memory of it, and all these different areas are stimulated to give you the overall experience, which we call flavor. Next. The right and left hemispheres have unique specialized functions. The left hemisphere is more into language processing, calculations, focusing on the right side, grasping with the right hand, interpreting experience, communicating. And the right hemisphere is more like attention to both visual spaces, appreciating music, appreciating sound and silence, emotions, comprehension. So there are subtle differences between the two hemispheres, but they are complementary. They are not against each other. In fact, you have to balance the two. You don't want to be too verbal and you don't want to be totally non-verbal. So we have to use both the hemispheres in a kind of complementary way, in a synchronous way. Next. I remember I saw a patient when I was practicing as a neurologist in Memorial Hospital. After finishing my office, I went to see this patient, and it was dinner time, and I was surprised to see that this patient had finished everything on the right side, and he did not touch anything on the left side. So I knew the diagnosis. I just turned the tray. As soon as I turned the tray, he started eating the remaining half. It is called hemi-attentional neglect syndrome, in which if you have a stroke in the right parietal cortex and where the attentional system is, the right parietal cortex gives attention to both visual spaces, while the left parietal cortex gives attention only to the right hemispace. So you get this hemispace in which some patients only shave the right side but not the left side because they don't even know that they have not shaved the left half of the face. Or sometimes they ignore the left arm or the left leg. They say it doesn't belong to me, this is some stranger. Or if you ask them to cross the lines, they cross all the lines on the right side but not the left side. If you ask them to copy a clock, they will draw all the numbers on the right side but nothing on the left. So it's a fascinating syndrome. Next. Another fascinating syndrome is what is called Gerstmann syndrome. Gerstmann syndrome happens when there is a stroke or tumor in the left parietal area, angular gyrus, supramarginal gyrus. And in that, these patients have difficulty writing, they have difficulty calculating, they have hard time telling the difference between left and right side. And they can't name the fingers of their hand. So all these symptoms together make what is called Gerstmann syndrome. It's fascinating how much our mental function depend on integrity of the brain and different areas. Next. One of the interesting areas in which neuroscience has made a lot of progress is studying the aha moment or like solving a puzzle. For instance, if I give you a puzzle, what word can connect the following three words? Crab, pine, and sauce. Some of you may come up with a quick answer. Some of you may come after a little later. But eventually, most people can figure it out. What is the common word that connects all these other three? And of course, the answer is apple, crab apple, pineapple, applesauce. Now, what these neuroscientists studied in the left one, they showed that when you solve the puzzle, there is a big joy of having solved that puzzle. And there is also an increase in activity in the right temporal area. And there is a clear difference between those who got the answer and those who didn't get the answer. So that aha moment, the joy of solving a puzzle, solving a problem, that is called the insight. And this insightful problem solving is the aha moment. Next. In this study, what they found, that as soon as you get the answer, there is an onset of the gamma activity, which is a high frequency with a lot of energy. And that has become the sign, electrophysiological sign of insight. Next. By the way, this month's Scientific American, March of 2025, the whole issue is on the wonder of insight. And on the left, there is a picture that says that this astronomer, when he was walking in the open space, and when he looked at um, the Milky Way, somehow it suddenly dawned on him that this Milky Way may be like a spiral galaxy. So he thought of this picture of a spiral galaxy, which then turned out to be accurate, which is correct. So sometimes the insights come out of nowhere, as if out of nowhere. Of course, it comes from our not only the individual but the collective memory, human memory, and intelligence, which is fascinating. Next. See, this is the when you are actually insightful problem solving versus analytical problem solving. Insightful problem solving, you have the activation of the temporal lobe on the right side. While in analytical problem solving, the action is more in the frontal lobes, especially the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which depends on the working memory, where you remember certain things, like 7 plus or minus 2 items, to solve a problem of words or numbers or something like that, instead of just a direct insight. Next. And what they found out, that when you solve the puzzle with insight, there is an activation of the orbitofrontal cortex. And the orbitofrontal cortex has to do with our emotions or feelings. So you have great joy, happiness, pleasure, so-called Ananda Sthiti. We call it Satchidananda, blissful conscious being. That is in the orbitofrontal cortex. Next. I have published an article about differentiating between consciousness and awareness. And I thought it will be better to say consciousness with contents, which is dualistic mode, while awareness of awareness itself, which is non-dual. But some people take a different view, like this uh, book from Princeton. He thought the other way around. He thought the awareness of some information and consciousness embeds all that. But different terminology, different ways of looking at it. Next. He also talks about awareness A versus awareness B, which is almost like the awareness of the body and awareness of the world. Or there is a beautiful shloka in our literature where Hanuman says to Shri Rama, Deha bhavena dasosmi, jiva bhavena twadamshakaha, atma bhavena tvamevaham, iti me nishchita matihi. That means when I think I'm only the body, then I'm your servant. I serve you. When I think I'm a living being, a jiva, then I'm a small part of you. And when I think I'm Atman or Brahman, then I'm you. This is my firm conviction. Next. In the right hemisphere, there is this attentional control network. Medial prefrontal cortex, parietal cortex, temporal cortex. This controls the attention as well as comprehension. This is a very important network. Next. This is a brief sketch about the memory system. On the left is this sensory memory, where we are bombarded by information which is infinite, limitless. You can't really process all that you receive. So a lot of it is discarded or ignored, but some of it is selected and put in the working memory. The working memory, you can keep like 7 plus or minus 2 items, like somebody's name or telephone number or some. So about 7 or plus 9, 7 plus or minus 2 items in working memory for about 20 to 30 seconds. But if you rehearse it, then it stays longer. And when you rehearse it long enough, you can push it to the long-term memory. And then long-term memory also dissipates gradually, unless you rehearse it frequently. Next. The working memory again has either the auditory, your inner voice, or images, your inner eye. And in the middle is the conscious awareness. Next. In the memory system, there are two. One is very fast processing, and the other is very slow, effortful. The fast processing is almost subconscious. When somebody is in a flow state, like Roger Federer playing effortlessly, is in a fast and accurate precision. If he talks to himself or worries about the next serve, he ruins the game. So these are two different systems, fast, pre-conscious or subconscious, and almost automatic with your expertise, and the slow with deliberation, voluntary effort, all that is a slow process. Next. Most of the biological systems are autopoietic. Autopoietic means they generate their own energy. They generate their own awareness, consciousness. And they self-organize and they are self-aware. So that's one way to look at the biological system. They are self-generating, self-organizing, and self-aware living systems. Next. Based on this, you can look at the self as an autopoietic self, autonomous self, perspectival self, narrative self, and social self. Narrative self is the one who talks and communicates with others. So there are many different aspects of the self. Next. And there is a symbiotic relationship between different people. So we serve more as an ecosystem where there are living and non-living elements, but there is a lot of interrelationship between both living as well as non-living entities. So the ecosystem works as a whole. The nature works as a single system. What I call the living universe or the living nature. Next. There is also symbiosis in which there is mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. In mutualism, both benefits. In commensalism, they both benefit, but nobody is hurt. In parasitism, one person is hurt. Next. Now, this is an interesting slide about the mindfulness. Is your mind full with so many past and future thoughts and fears and emotions and all that? Or is your mind calm and clear and relatively empty or transparent? So, in mindfulness meditation, of course, you try to teach that. One of the ways is what is called the minimal phenomenal content. That means you just pay attention to your breathing or your movement or your mantra or Om recitation or pranayam, whatever you're doing. Next. There is one interesting way to look at the universe as an electric universe, or I call it more bioelectric universe, in the sense that the whole universe acts as a whole as a bioelectric system. But of course, there are biomechanical and biochemical systems. They work together as a single system that self-generates and self-organizes. Next. The whole system acts like multiple levels, almost like the Russian or the babushka dolls, like the molecules and atoms, and then cells and organisms and the swarms, and the whole nature works as a whole. It's called holarchy. That means it is made up of multiple parts or holons. They work together. Next. And this is my last slide for today's talk. I like this painting. This is by Marc Chagall, 1911, and he calls it I and My Village. This is interesting that this is his impression, his memories, his impressions of his village, which is fascinating. And all of us also have an image about our surroundings, our village, our home, our family, our town. And there are many famous people who have remarked about it. And I wanted to show you that this is the slide that takes you to the next level, which is neurophilosophy. And you will see I and the Village painting by Marc Chagall. Hey Vishwachi Mazhe Ghar, Santa Jnaneshwar. Observer is the observed, J. Krishnamurti. There are no others, Shri Raman Maharshi. I think I mentioned like quantum nature embodies and embeds all life. Then Upanishads, like Ishavasya Midam Sarvam. The whole universe is both immanent and transcendent with the divine. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the whole earth is my family. And Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma, all this is Brahman or Atman or the divine. So these are some of the concepts we'll think about in the subsequent talks. We'll also address the limitations of science, neuroscience, and then we'll consider how we can interpret our experience. Is there such a thing as a spiritual experience? Is there such a thing as a spiritual insight or turiya? So we'll discuss some of these in the next 2 or 3 lectures. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vinod sir, Vinod ji, Dr. Vinod, what I'm supposed to call you, I don't know. But it was pretty enlightening session and I really enjoyed every bit of it. तुम्ही जेव्हा सगळं सांगत होते आणि तुम्ही आलाच त्या न्यूरो काय म्हणतात त्याला फिलॉसॉफीकडे शेवटी, पण तुम्ही जेव्हा सगळी प्रत्येक गोष्ट सांगत होते, ते डोळ्याचं चित्र दाखवलं तेव्हा जे पिंडी ते ब्रह्मांडी असं त्याच्यात थोडस असं वाटलं की ते सांगतंय का ते चित्र आपल्याला. किंवा तुम्ही जे म्हटलात की मेमरी जी तुम्ही सांगितली किंवा पझल सॉल्व्ह केल्यानंतर जो आनंद होतो तो आपल्याला जेव्हा नामस्मरणानंतर होईल, जेव्हा आपल्याला ध्यान लागल्यानंतर तसा आनंद होईल, तेव्हा आपल्याला त्या गोष्टीची गोडी लागेल आणि आपण ते पुन्हा पुन्हा करत राहू. तुम्ही सातत्याबद्दल बोललात ते पण रिलेटेबल होतं. सो परत एकदा तुम्ही जे सांगितलं की ही सगळीच युनिव्हर्स अशी एक इलेक्ट्रिक युनिव्हर्स आहे आणि सगळंच असं एकत्र आहे. यू जस्ट कॅनॉट टेक अ पीस अँड टॉक अबाउट इट ॲज अन
No,
इंडिपेंडंट एंटिटी, विच इज व्हॉट आय गॉट फ्रॉम युअर लेक्चर टुडे. सो इट्स वंडरफुल.
exactly.
एक्झॅक्टली. सो दॅट्स सो वंडरफुल. आणि सगळ्या आपल्या तत्वज्ञानाशी ते तुम्ही जोडणारच आहात. पुढचे आपले 3 सेशन त्याच्यासाठी आहेत. सो थँक्स अगेन.
Thank you.
आणि आपल्याला नेहमीची आपली पद्धत आहे की आपण प्रत्येक सत्रानंतर एक भजन सेवा घेत असतो. आपल्या स्वतःला नामस्मरणातनं ध्यानातनं आनंद मिळायचा तेव्हा तो मिळेल, पण भजन ऐकलं की आपल्याला निश्चित आनंद होतो. भजनातला प्रत्येक शब्द, प्रत्येक सूर आणि ते सादर करणारा आजचा जो आपला भजन सेवेकरी आहे त्याचं नाव आहे आदी काळे. अतिशय काय म्हणतात त्याला, संगीत शिकलेला, संगीत विशारद, स्वतः संगीताचे आता वर्ग घेतो बे एरियात.
Wow, छान.
अतिशय सुंदर गायक आहे. तुम्ही त्याला कधी मंडळाच्या प्लॅटफॉर्मवर ऐकलं सुद्धा असेल किंवा तो स्वतःचे कन्सर्ट सुद्धा करतो. सर आदी, तू जर आहेस तर प्लीज तुझा कॅमेरा सुरू करतोस.
हाय.
थँक्यू. आणि तो आज परमपूज्य नारायण महाराजांनी रचलेलं महाराजा सेवा घ्यावी हे भजन सादर करणार आहे. पुन्हा एकदा आजच्या सगळ्या सत्राशी ते भजन असं छान जोडलं गेलेलं आहे की ॲज आय सेड की यू कॅनॉट टेक अ एंटिटी इंडिपेंडेंटली अँड टॉक अबाउट इट. सो यू हॅव टू बी हंबल इन थ्रू आउट युअर लाईफ. There is nothing called self-made. There are so many energies, so many things working together to make who you are. तर तेच या भजनातनं आपल्याला आपला जो भाव आहे तो कसा कायम सेवा भावाचाच असावा हे आपल्याला महाराज सांगतायत. सो आदी, इफ यू कॅन प्लीज स्टार्ट युअर भजन सेवा. थँक्यू सो मच.
ऐकू येते?
हो, व्यवस्थित ऐकू येते आधी.
महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, शरण मी पाये, शरण मी पाये, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, अकुला पायी शरण मी आले, अकुला पायी शरण मी आले, देह भाव हा विसरून गेले, देह भाव हा विसरून गेले, आये विण हे रूप उमलले, आई विण हे रूप उमलले, प्रेमा ठाई, प्रेमा ठाई, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, मनसुमनाचे पुष्प वाहिले, मनसुमनाचे पुष्प वाहिले, भक्तिरसाचे पाणी घातले, भक्तिरसाचे पाणी घातले, विवेक चंदन भाली लावले, विवेक चंदन भाली लावले, प्रेम पाही प्रेमे पाही, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे. संसारासी पडला घाला, संसारासी पडला घाला, संकल्पाचा टोचित भाला, संकल्पाचा टोचित भाला, तुझ विण नाही शांती जीवाला, तुझ विण नाही शांती जीवाला, माझ्या ठाई माझ्या ठाई, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे. नारायण म्हणे सीताराम, नारायण म्हणे सीताराम, नारायण नारायण म्हणे सीताराम, तुमच्या ठाई माझ्या प्रेम, तुमच्या ठाई माझ्या प्रेम, सद्गुरु वाचन कोणी न काम, सद्गुरु वाचन कोणी न काम, चित्ता ठाई चित्ता ठाई, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे, महाराजा सेवा घ्यावे. थँक्यू.
Thank you.
सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज
Beautiful.
की जय. Wow, Adi, awesome. Like watching you was also a treat, not just hearing you. You were so involved in the vision. Very nice. खूपच छान झालं. नेहमीच होते आपली पुन्हा, कारण आपण ते भजन सेवा म्हणून हे सेवेकरी करत असतात, त्याच्यामुळे आपली दर सत्राची सेवा छान होते. पुन्हा एकदा थँक्यू सो मच आदी. वी विल लाईक टू हॅव यू अगेन हिअर, सो प्लीज कम.
ओके.
आता भजन सेवेनंतर आपण प्रश्नोत्तरांकडे जात असतो. मला असं वाटलं आज आमच्या जरा तांत्रिक अडचणीमुळे आपल्याला थोडा उशीर झाला सत्र सुरू करायला, पण विनोद काकांचा